Let's call this meeting to order. Let's see. Melanie, are you going to talk about in-kind?
Yes. So regional planning efforts are enhanced by recording time donated by attendees, volunteers, and participants. PAG collects data on the time dedicated to meetings and activities to apply for use as matching funds for grants and federal dollars. If you're paid with federal dollars, please let us know now, or you can send it to us via email. Time spent in preparation for this meeting will be estimated by PAG staff who are knowledgeable of the agenda and meeting materials. At the conclusion of this meeting, the session report will automatically calculate your time spent in this meeting. The time spent working on PAG and RTA initiatives, programs, and special projects may also be eligible for consideration for matching funds. So if you spend any time preparing for this meeting, please let us know by email as well, and we can make sure that your time is recorded. Thank you.
Awesome. So it looks like, are we just going to jump right into this, or do we want to ask if anyone, are we going to wait till the end to see if anyone has anything that they want to bring up?
I think we can move forward.
Okay.
With the next agenda item.
All right. So we are going to talk about Pima County, has been collecting, updating, and working with the current MS4 boundaries within Pima County to make it publicly accessible online. And I guess that I see Marie's smiling face here on Zoom, so take it away, Marie.
Thank you, Paula. In our last meeting, I noted that we have a GIS system where we plotted the locations of all the MS4s. We've really needed that ourselves so that when people go out to do inspections, that they know what lies within Pima County's jurisdiction versus another jurisdiction. Now we have had a map that we've been working with that has not reflected annexations that have been taking place. So we actually were very busy in the last 3 or 4 months with annual reports, and so didn't make much progress on that. But the idea now is that whatever annexed lands have, whenever an annexation occurs, that annexed area then is taken out of Pima County and then moved into the whoever annexed it. We're still in progress with that, and our goal is to do an update on a quarterly basis. The annexations don't happen that frequently, but we do want to be able to have some kind of a regular check of the system to see where we are. So we're still in progress with that. And when that is completed, Melanie, should I send you a notice that we've got that going?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
And we'll send it out to the group.
So that's the first part of what we're wanting to do, is to make sure that we're having an updated GIS map. One of the things that we know we are missing for sure is that we do not have ADOT's areas identified on the map. And I know that once we get the updating process completed, then David, Mac, and I will be working together to figure out how to add in ADOT's information onto our map. So not much to report at this point. I don't know, David, if you wanted to add anything, or we're good.
I'm good. I'm good.
So Marie, do you get the annexation information from the recorder's office? Or how
Yes.
do you get that in? Okay, that's how you get it.
I don't personally get it, but our IT system records where all those annexations are taking place. So there's an entire layer in our GIS system of maps that identifies where it's occurring, what the date was, and who the annex.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. Does anyone else have questions or comments?
I do. So, Marie, did you say then when you're completed, it'll be hosted on the PIMA maps?
Yes.
And do you have a estimated time when we might see that?
I don't, because our flood control district is doing the work to do the update, and I'm not sure how this is fitting in with their workload. I think it's more of an working through the technical issues to get it set up, because we need to have some script written, and once the script is written, then it needs to go to IT, who will actually run that script on a regular basis. Scott, did you have a question?
I have a question, yes. Marie, you're just talking about the urbanized area boundaries of the MS4, right? We're not talking about the infrastructure involved in it, right? Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes. So we're doing the outlines of the jurisdictions. And within Pima County, we also have additional layers that show where the roads are and where the drainages are, which is what we consider to be the MS4. It's a
Okay.
good question.
Yeah, my boss, John Spiker, wanted to know. He was hopeful that people were going to start mapping to, down to the level of culverts, inlets, things like that. But that'd be a huge lift.
So we do have additional, so I'm looking at these areas as the farthest boundary of somebody's jurisdiction. So if there's a complaint that comes in that is not on a road or not in a drainage way, we still know who to make the referral to, and then they would make the decision based on their own policies about what they're going to do next.
Sure.
We do have additional layers that show where the infrastructure is. So we do have storm drains, manholes, scuppers.
That's already on Pima maps too. So
It is for Pima County structures. We
Yeah.
do not have that for the other jurisdictions.
Are you wanting to host that additional information if they have it available?
I am not sure. Let's have a discussion if that would be something useful to the group.
I guess it would depend on if each of you has your own site that you prefer to host that on, or if you would like to have it on this sort of centralized location. And if you have the data available.
And one other question, Marie, are you doing this by urbanized area? Or are you saying that, like, for instance, Oro Valley technically is not all MS4, it's whatever the census says is the urbanized area. So I don't know how is that what you're doing?
We are identifying it by the city and town limits.
Oh, okay.
So it's the outer limit of the town of Oro Valley.
Okay.
Yeah, so within the town of Oro Valley, you're making your own decisions about what's.
Well,
the
we're treating it
MS4.
all as an MS4 anyway, but
Okay,
by the letter of the, whatever they, how they define them at the federal level is urbanized area. We're going beyond that.
You know, I think for the most MS4s, it is an urbanized area, but for the larger MS4s like ADOT and Pima County, we have vast tracts that are not urbanized areas.
Yeah, that you still have to look at.
If there's a structure there that we own and maintain. Hey, Elizabeth has joined us. All right.
All right, anyone else?
I think we might have an unanswered question of from each of you if you have interest in Pima County hosting any additional data. Marie wasn't sure whether to offer that unless there was interest. So not just the MS4 boundary, but those
I'd have, I would have to check with people higher up than me on that.
Makes sense.
But
Miranda has a lot of that stuff mapped, but we do it in a system called Cartograph. And I don't know if that's easily transferable. I could
Well-
see where the benefit would be, you know, in those areas where jurisdictions butt up against each other, you could trace something through and know where like the next inlet or something like that is. So I could see where it would be beneficial. I'm just not a tech enough person to know how to make that happen. But I do know that we have a lot of that data.
Hey, Paula, your cartograph is backed up by GIS. That's where the location is coming from. So it's there.
Okay, cool.
So I'm asking the question if people want that, and I still need to go back to my guys and say, are we willing to be the home for that information? And I think because, you know, this information is changing on a regular basis because each jurisdiction is doing its own construction projects. And by definition, we would be out of date. So you know, our MS4 permit requires that we have mapped where the MS4s are that we are adjacent to, and also to identify the interconnections. And we haven't formally gone through and done something like that because we already have the areas of each MS4, and we have the drainage lines showing where natural flows go. So we're using that as our points of interconnection, is where that line crosses in the intersection of our boundary.
Well, if you end up finding that the county can't host additional information and the group does find out from the people above them that they would like to have it in a central location, PAG can continue to offer that on our maps as well. But Marie's the source for the MS4 boundaries now with that nice automated script. So we can host it on our site as well. We share a lot of background data in other cases as well.
Thank you for the offer, Mead. And as I talk with my guys, I'll let them know that that is something that's been offered.
Yeah, happy to do a backup.
I can see the benefit of having a central repository, and I also know it's going to take work for somebody to be doing the regular updates.
It's a very good point, Marie, because it does change, like you said, often.
It's probably going to be changing more often in Pima County because we have area for people to do more development, but not always. I know Marana and City of Tucson, Oro Valley are making changes.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Marie, for that update. Next we have, I think we're going to have Megan from ADEQ to discuss the ADEQ's E. coli concentration study along the impaired stretch in the Santa Cruz River, which unfortunately Marana fits into. So I am very excited to hear what updates you have. And City of Tucson staff is going to discuss the potential stormwater quality impacts of unsheltered populations in city washes. So Megan, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited. You're excited to talk about E. coli because I love talking about E. coli. So I'm going to share. Were you going to share the PowerPoint that I sent, or should I grab it and share it?
Yeah, we're going to share it.
Okay.
I think we just needed to get something queued up. And but if you wanted to give a little bit of an intro to start off, that would be great.
Yeah, I'd love to. So hi, everyone. Happy Tuesday. I hope you had a fantastic Halloween. My name is Megan Smart. I'm a senior scientist with the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. I have been there for 17 years, worked on a lot of intermittent stream research, work a lot on flow regimes and WOTUS, a little bit of TMDLs, but my baby is Arizona Water Watch, which is our community science program. And I don't think that we can do anything without involving the community, right? Like that's how we're going to save the world, is everyone comes together and we work to solve problems. So let me see, there's the little arrows. Control. Oh, okay, perfect. Oh, too fast. Okay. So I wasn't sure what everyone's background was. So I thought we'd kind of start off with a quick Clean Water Act overview, a quick overview of what ADEQ does, and then jump into the community science program and focus on some water bodies that are listed as impaired for E. coli. So as you may or may not know, but in 1969, the Cuyahoga River caught on fire, and this was the impetus of the need to have clean water in the nation, right? And our maybe not so favorite President Nixon and Congress came together and developed the Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Act is, to restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the nation's water. And if you guys have questions, I would love for you to just jump in instead of at the end. So it seems like a small enough group, so please do. So Arizona Water Watch and most of my surface water work is housed within the surface water section at ADEQ. So we do monitoring. So EPA delegates Clean Water Act requirements to the states. Those requirements are we monitor and assess water bodies. We also develop TMDLs. We identify sources. We try to restore impaired waters. When I say impaired, I assume that you guys know, but basically when we collect data, once we have enough of it, we kind of bucket it. So if a stream or a lake is impaired, that's kind of the naughty list. That means it has, some issues with certain parameters. If it's attaining, it means it's meeting all of our parameters. And then if it's inconclusive, it means that we don't have enough data and it kind of sits in this bucket until we can figure out more information. So you guys live in Arizona, but when I talk at a national level, they don't understand that we do actually have water. We have around 100,000 stream miles in the state. We have over 257 lakes. We also have wetlands. And then we have, very few staff to collect all the data necessary to protect and enhance those water bodies. So, how do we help adjust or fix that problem? And this is where I do the community science to the rescue, because this is the idea that there are people that are out there that can help and want to help. And so if they're given the right resources, training and tools, then they can help us collect the data necessary and identify pollution sources. So this is a quick overview of the program. So Arizona Water Watch, community science in general, can basically do anything. We collect water quality data. So volunteers will collect the same data that I would collect. We have an equipment loaner program. So they have access to our $5,000 multi-parameter probes. They have access to maybe an E. coli processing station, which is another $5,000. And then they, would help collect, maybe we needed just a nutrient sample. We would pay for that cost, that lab costs, to properly assess a water body. So within the program, we've delisted 7 waters. So that means that volunteers have gone out and collected enough information to show that water that was on the naughty list, the impaired list, is now attaining. So that might mean that someone else has put in BMPs to help address those issues, or we just have newer data, newer trends. There's lots of reasons for delist, but this is a really big deal because DEQ doesn't have all the resources to sample all the water bodies. We also do fun things like flow regime updates. So we can use time-lapse photography for that, or wet-dry mapping. We can't assess water bodies without an understanding of the flow regime and properly identifying the designated uses of that water body. That could be like a whole nother presentation if we wanted to talk about that and standards. We also have just a 3-minute observation app. So the Arizona Water Watch app is used to kind of help know when something is flowing or when it's dry for a stream. It could also be used for a harmful algal bloom. So the public is submitting photos. Those pictures go to scientists within the agency who take a look at it and assess, next steps. Oftentimes, maybe it's moss and not an algal bloom, but either way, people are submitting information and we're able to kind of hone in on what we need to know. Also, fish kills and things like that will come through the app, and then we'll touch base with Arizona Game and Fish and let them know. We do a lot of pollution identification. We're going to talk about this in a little more detail. The example I have here is there's some very awesome science out there. For example, ship and sniff. So we can send samples to these dogs that have been trained to smell human sewage. If human sewage is in that sample, they will bow down to the sample. We've also flown those amazing dogs out, and we've walked stretches of Miller Creek, for example, in Prescott, or Oak Creek, or parts of the Verde. When I talk about it a little bit later, we're going to talk about it in the context of microbial source tracking. So trying to figure out where the E. coli is coming from, those tracers. Protecting health. A lot of volunteer groups around the state will help us collect E. coli data. For example, Butcher Jones, Slide Rock State Park, Fossil Creek. One of the success stories I really like to tell is for Butcher Jones, which if you guys have been to Saguaro Lake, it's a beautiful little cove. It's shallow, it can be warm water. And we had high E. coli rates there, but it was a popular swimming area. And then working with the Forest Service, and then Friends of the Tonto, which is a volunteer group, and then a horse advocacy group, we realized that the E. coli numbers are coming from the horse manure. And then so volunteer groups come in and they pick up the horse manure every day. And now we're not seeing E. coli exceedances. So that's an example of the community working together, right, to solve the problem. We'll do some storm sampling. So especially on our ephemeral stream systems, they're, hard to get a sample. But if a volunteer lives right by there, they can, use a reach pole and safely help us gather that data. And then we also in 2020 added a trash cleanup component where volunteers will go around and clean up trash. They'll count dirty diapers. They'll help educate the public near water bodies. This is what our 2021 stats will look like. 2022 will come out, the beginning of early next year. But we had around 20 active volunteer groups, which is really good. We saw a decrease with COVID. We had over 460 app submissions. Over 14,000 pounds of trash was removed. 3,750 water quality records were submitted. This is basically cut in half from the years before, but we saw more trash and wet dry mapping events occurring. And I think that that was a product from COVID and just kind of doing isolated groups. Basically, I'm telling you that volunteers are amazing. All right, and here we leveraged the use of Survey 123 a lot because I'm only one person. And I told you I was working on flow regimes, WOTAs, TMDLs as well. So the idea of getting data electronically, we're updating and improving these as we go along the way. For instance, wet dry mapping, trying to figure out a way to show volunteers where a reach, starts and stops. And now Survey 123 can calculate, a wet segment versus just points. So this is a lot of the program is built off of this, and I offer this to anyone that wants to use Survey 123. You can rip off and deploy anything. I will give you the coding, and whatever you need to do, I will, help as best I can. Okay, Arizona has a credible data rule. So that basically means that in order for us to use the data for a statewide assessment, you need a sample plan, an annual sample plan, a QAP, which they're rolled into our internal ADEQ QAP. You need an annual training and an annual audit. So, we'll do a lot for new groups, in-person trainings. If they're repeating groups, we'll do kind of virtual trainings and virtual audits. I use a lot of visual tools to help ensure quality assurance. For example, if I say I need a full chem set, well, that 83-year-old, retired accountant may have no idea what I'm talking about. But if after a training and a handbook and cartoon video lessons and this picture, then they know what to do. They can just fill these up. Use fun visual field forms because science is really fun and I want to make it appealing. The program's built for 4th graders to retirees. This is a really cool E. coli processing mat. So if you forget the steps, you just, place this out. It's laminated by the E. coli processing station. You put your gloves on the icon. You put your Sharpie on the icon, your media, and your bottle. And like I said before, the secret to the success of this program, or really in general, anything that we have to do to solve as humans, is just if you can find the people that have time and you give them the right resources, we're going to save the world in some capacity. Okay. Oh, and there's our example of the equipment loaner library. Not everyone has access to a $5,000 probe, rightly so. So we make them available and train them on how to use it. A lot of quality assurance checks and balances within it as well. Okay, our priority waters.
Again?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I just have a quick question on the slide, two slides prior now.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I just get so excited.
It's okay. One more. There you go. I just wanted to look more closely at that because I didn't read them all.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah. So this is that generic Arizona Water Watch app. So this one, anyone can download on our website, and that would cover kind of the harmful algal blooms, or if something is flowing, if you guys are out hiking, take a picture. If it's dry, that really helps us update our flow regime maps.
Awesome.
Then we have kind of our more data. So they'll collect it on the fun visual forms, but then they input it into Survey 123. Before, if I get paper forms, I just can't keep up with the data. It's death by data. So at least this way, and then all the QA/QC measures are in place too. It'll auto-calculate, your percent difference or your pre and post calibration data. It has pictures of the sites and things like that. So this one's really for trained volunteers. Wet dry mapping is another one that anyone can do. We're currently updating this, but there's a cartoon video lesson for this. So people watch the video lesson and then you can fill it out. We also have wet dry mapping kits in the Maricopa County library system. So as an effort to kind of engage the public, they can check out a GPS unit because not everyone has, phones. And so they can do a GPS unit, use a computer, and then enter the data that way. And then we have the trash cleanup, which is also built for the general public. So anyone that wants to clean up trash, you can download the form, you can watch the cartoon video lesson, and it kind of walks you through what we're looking for. Trying to get creative for only one person running a program.
Those are great. Thanks.
Yes. Okay. There we go. Don't look at that one yet. It's gonna be really fun. Okay. So the priorities for the Arizona Water Watch program for last year and this year, they're not in order necessarily, but we're focused on the Santa Cruz River, and we'll talk about that. It's a particular reach that we think that we could possibly delist. We're seeing some interesting results, so more to come on that. Sonoyta Creek, which was delisted, so volunteers have been sampling that. And then Oak Creek, we have a piggybacking up with another colleague and working very hard to educate the public, reduce parking in Oak Creek Canyon, and identifying particular trailheads, which reduces E. coli coming down to the stream, because E. coli and sediment will attach to each other. So if we reduce social trails with the sediment, we will reduce E. coli as well. And then Fossil Creek, which I will talk about because this could give us a little insight into the Santa Cruz. Then all the other things I talked about, those are just the 4 priority areas. We have multiple groups on Oak Creek, but then, we've got volunteers all around the state doing data gaps. So for example, AZ Water Dogs, they sample every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And the gentleman who's retired and his dog go out, but the wife does all what they say is the hard parts, which is the pre and post calibration of the probe or anything related to math. And so then they go out and she gets to work on her stained glass. So it's a fun, all different types of volunteer groups. And then the trash wet dry mapping and the app are kind of you don't really have to talk to me. You can just kind of do it. And we really love that data. Okay. So let's talk about the Santa Cruz River E. coli study, which is probably what you guys are more excited to hear. So this reach is located just, it starts above the Tres Rios and flows, northwest and ends just below the Avra Valley Road. So it is currently listed for E. coli. The standard for partial body contact for this particular reach is 576 colony forming units per 100 mils. I have added 3 sample sites. So the question was, hey, this wastewater treatment plant was updated. Can we see if the E. coli results are better within this particular reach? So we have a few volunteer groups, water wizards, water guardians, who sample monthly. So it's a little bit small, but basically you can see this red line is our standard for the E. coli for partial body contact. So this first reach, we're seeing we haven't had any exceedances. So the water is looking great. There's E. coli in every system. Streams can handle a natural amount of E. coli. Then we go to this next site at Cortero Road, and we're seeing multiple exceedances. The grayed out was the volunteers used expired media, so I can't use that data. I still put it here because it still tells us some information, but this data I wouldn't, send to EPA. We're not rolling it up to be shared. So here, we've got multiple exceedances. We're going to come back and talk about the site. But then at the bottom of the reach, E. coli is dropping back out, and we are seeing, no exceedances again. Oftentimes, you can see we have less samples here. It's drying out right there as well. So, but even so, when it is flowing, we are not seeing E. coli exceedances. So what is going on at this kind of middle site at Cortero Road? There's a few things, and we're going to have to drill into the data. One, there's a noticeable homeless population that are kind of camped under the bridge. So maybe that's contributing. So maybe just some educational signs and pointing them. There's a public bathroom right there, kind of a park facility. Another thing is it's right by a bridge. And so it could be there's a lot of swallows there. So perhaps it's, the birds are contributing to the E. coli. So I'm going to go to the next slide. We're going to jump to Fossil Creek. That could be, could help us with this study in the future. Oh, okay. I guess that's not quite yet. I wanted to say we're also working with the Sonoran Institute to do trash transects anywhere along the Santa Cruz River. So that's been a really fun project and eye-opening on the different trash that we're gathering. Also created a survey 123 for this, and they house the data, and then we just supplement it for them with our survey 123.
Is that related to, are you working with Sonoran Institute on that one?
Yeah, yep. Okay, so here's the Fossil Creek example. Fossil Creek is also listed for E. coli. E. coli is the #1 impairment in the state. It's also the #1 impairment in the nation. So I don't know if you know, but there is a fire. It's called the Backbone Fire, and that started in June of last year. And so because of that fire and the high risk for flooding, and the potential, it's kind of in a confined canyon, Fossil Creek. The Forest Service has closed it down. So there's no recreation in Fossil Creek right now. It has been closed since last June. As a scientist, this is the optimal time to geek out, because there's never a time where I get to not have recreational impacts on one of the most highly recreated sites in Arizona. So Forest Service, Tonto, Coconino, and Friends of the Forest, a volunteer group in ADEQ, have been conducting monthly samples for E. coli. We've also been doing monthly microbial source tracking, which is, it's a newer science. This is through NAU, but it's really trying to figure out what markers are presenting in that E. coli. It's great for me to say, hey, there's an E. coli exceedance or not, but are we seeing that E. coli is coming from Procyanidea, for example, raccoons, or are we seeing bovine, canine, human? That data is still with NAU. They're working on getting the PCR. They're really working on getting the right markers. So this is a little bit new, but what we'll do is we'll pair it with the E. coli samples that we have. They are also collecting the multi-parameter probe. So that would be your pH, dissolved oxygen, conductivity, temperature data. And then quarterly, we are collecting chemistry data. So this could be an option for some of those Santa Cruz sites, right? Like that middle Cortero. What is happening there? If we can get the DNA kind of marker, that might help us inform what BMPs to put in place, right? Scott, you had a question.
Yeah, my boss, John Spiker, would like to know if anybody has investigated whether that waste management facility at Ina and the freeway area might be a contributor to this problem.
That is very possible. It's really at this point is we only have, oh, look, it's hitting E. coli, it's exceeding. And then that's as far as that goes. So that's a good one. If we dig in, so, we have limited funds as everyone does, but if I can say, hey, look, the E. coli is low at this first site, E. coli is low at that bottom site, like it's dropping out there, like a natural channel system works. Can we have some money and focus some efforts on fixing this one? Then we can delist a whole reach, and we have to start chunking the problems out like that to fix them. So I will write that down, Scott. Thank you. And I will add that to something to look into.
Sure.
Yeah.
I can shed some light on that as our RWRD has been monitoring for E. coli in their effluent, and when I look at their data, they're all below detection limit of 2 MPN. So it's been perplexing to understand what the source is. And I was very heartened to hear you talk about the bridge, because I have been looking out there too, and there are bats out there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there are, or it could be a homeless camp, because I did see some tents out there. So there are potential anthropogenic sources and naturally occurring sources out there. And from the research that we've done from the wastewater treatment plant, that's highly unlikely.
Okay.
And I must say that the water quality data that RWRD collects is actually submitted to ADEQ, so it's part of the record that's used to develop the TMDLs.
That's
or whether it's
amazing.
impaired or not.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Thank you. I love when
Sure.
people share data. That's really good. That helps a lot. Yeah. Yeah. So that's what I have.
I have a quick question. Just following up on, I think it was Scott. When you were saying John Spiker suggested it might be a waste management facility, is that the one, the tank screen stuff, the private facility there, or is that a different one?
It's the tank screen stuff, yes.
Okay, so like compost and that kind of thing are on site.
All manner of things would be in there probably, depending on, people are emptying their yards in there. It's a landfill, generally used for green landscape, but who knows what's ending up in there.
Sure.
That area was like the first spot that we thought, hey, that could be a source. And if you take a walk around that property, they have got berms that are probably 8 feet high, that contain all the composting materials inside there. So unless there is some port or something that's doing a direct leak out of there, I'm gonna guess not, because I would anticipate to see a lot more E. coli at higher concentrations if there was a direct connection there. One of the things that we've been looking at is there could be, there are neighborhoods that are upstream in the CDC that could be contributing to those areas. One of the things that Pima County's looked at is we have 5 different land use types and looked at where the E. coli concentrations are occurring. And the medium density residential areas is where we're seeing the highest concentration of E. coli. And that particular neighborhood is looks like 4 or 5 one-story houses, 4 or 5 bedrooms, so they're large houses, and everybody has a dog. And so it may be that they are not employing the right pet waste disposal techniques. But if you look at the density, the population density, it's falling into that middle density when you're probably going to have a lot more urban areas and have a pet source. Possible. It's purely hypothetical at this point.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There's, with Oak Creek, an early study that was trying to get to kind of tracing of DNA, said it was raccoon was the #1 contributor, right? Procyanidase. We just always blame humans, but so it showed that it was raccoons, but really it was still a human issue because people were bringing their trash down to the water, and raccoons will take their food and dip it in the water to eat it. And so it was the trash that was really attracting them. But it is like, I love you're looking at the medium density and trying to figure out, it's probably multi-layered.
Yes.
But if we can start, tackling, the largest contributor, I mean, a lot of what you pointed on for the dogs will focus on, I don't think that people know, or I don't think that they think that their dog poop will make it to the water that their kids might swim in, and after the next storm. And so it's a lot about education.
Yes.
I think I just have this last slide, which you guys will have, but that's just the resources. So if you guys, oh golly, I'm sorry. There you go. So there's links to the resources, and reach out if you have any questions or need any help with anything.
Thank you so much. I noticed Elizabeth's hand up before me though. If you wanted to jump in still.
Hi, yeah, Elizabeth, City Tucson. Hi, Megan. I'd like to work with you on City Tucson stormwater quality.
Yeah. I focus on surface water, but I know that there's a lot of changes with stormwater, and
So and I also wanted to follow up along the lines with Marie. We also are seeing from last year's data, we have a mixed residential use area. It also exceeded, to 2,400 on our E. coli, and then our commercial watershed also. The other three, we had some questionable data on it. It was lower than expected, but one of them we attribute to a storm event. It was a little bit more higher intensity rain condition, and we think we may have been there at the latter part of the sampling time frame. So, but I would agree with Marie. There's we have people walking dogs in that first mixed residential area, and we often wonder how much of that is from that. And also, of course, we have a lot of housing, homeless, unsheltered population that I think is contributing as well in other locations. So,
yeah, lots of, I really think, in terms of being progressive and Pima County, you guys, woo, I love it. You share data and you collect samples and keep doing it. And, collaboration. Let's make it happen, Elizabeth.
I'd like to talk to you about our retrofit project for the new permit and spend some time with you at some point.
Okay, I'll try my best to help.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're very much of the mind that the data is very useful, because that adds significant more information to the pot. And certainly we know that you guys up in Phoenix, it's a big deal to drive down to Tucson to take a sample. So
yes,
which is why I am thoroughly impressed by your citizen science, and that you've been teaching people how to collect samples. That is really wonderful, and I think that's the key to the future of getting lots of good data. Now, I didn't see it on there. You probably got that on there, but once you've collected the sample, do you have a thing in there about put that bottle on ice right away?
Oh yeah. So we have, so they have, and on that form too. So we have to track everything. I would say that the volunteer data, I can prove to you that it is so high quality because of all the questions that I asked these amazing volunteers, but they'll put it on ice right away. Then they have their, it's actually 8-hour holding time now. IDEX changed their holding time. It used to be 6 hours, it's 8 hours. Some of them are using 18-hour media. Some of them are using the 24-hour media. So they have to tell us when it was collected, when it was incubated, when it was read. They'll send pictures of their field form. So there's so many different, their audits, they have to pass an audit, right, where I have to watch them. They'll have to take pictures to show me the sampling tray, that it's yellow, that coliforms are present, right, and it's fluorescing. But any of these things, people can do, it's just more about the visual reminders, making it fun, teaching in different ways. Can you see it? Can you watch this cartoon lesson? Everyone has my personal cell phones number. I get lots of texts on Saturdays, but I would rather answer the question right away. So there's a lot of QC measures in place because all this data is QA/QC by us, some is rejected. It has to be, right? If I can't prove that it's true, I'm not going to share it. And then it goes up to EPA and lives forever. So all of this data is available through the water quality portal as well.
It's really great. Thank you.
I'll jump in with my question then. Actually, a few comments. First, I think this is impressive, the amount of resources you have available. And I wanted to give context for this group. We bring together all the local MS4s to, in part, one of our goals is to do collaborative outreach. And so we've done a lot of scoop the poop messaging and just sharing it so it's more recognizable and regionally cohesive. And then we were fortunate to get an ADQ grant a few years ago to write up, well, it was a stormwater pollution prevention and green infrastructure regional plan. And in that, although we recommended green infrastructure to mitigate pollution, we also encouraged the dog waste collection. But our primary recommendation out of all that was we need more source tracking to know if this is like the thing that we should put resources into.
Mm-hmm.
So we're always just trying to keep that on the radar and let people cite that report if they want to apply for grants. But always interested in if ADQ has plans for additional source tracking. And in addition to that, if this group feels like they need assistance through volunteers, or even if you can offer these apps for their own staff to use if there's any needs for enhanced in the field service.
Yes. Okay, there are multiple questions there.
Yes, I'm sorry. I can repeat it works of only.
So for the microbial source tracking, I would say, I would really consider a pilot at this point. So I can keep you informed as we progress. So it's Fossil and Oak Creek are the two that we're working on with that right now. It's expensive. However, as they're fine tuning, at NAU, getting the right markers, not everyone's gut biome is the same. So, my colleague, Ron Tiller, who's amazing, was going to, zoos to collect otter feces to give to NAU so that they could get the right markers out, for example. But what we're seeing is a little bit of those DNA tracers missing a little bit since everyone's gut biome was a little bit different. So as we're honing in on this process, I think we will get better. I think it's very valuable, and this will be the way that we go in the future. Will we apply it to the Cortero Road example? I mean, I hope so. That's my hopes with Fossil Creek is that, and going back to that slide, there isn't any recreation occurring right now, except for us being out there, and we don't have any exceedances. The highest is 38.4. I mean, that is very low. So we're going to continue the study when recreation opens back up. And so if we start to see E. coli spiking, even regardless of the DNA markers for the MST, right? If it's canine or it's not going to be the wildlife because the wildlife are there right now. So human, then either way, it's a human issue, right? So that's what it'll be interesting to see. But now they also have their permits in place. So as we do these different projects, we will apply what we learn to multiple reaches around the state. And so I hope that we can do this with that one Cortero Road site. I don't think it would be a huge lift financially, as long as these pilot studies go well. So even if we get a generic, like, hey, I think it was Marie that mentioned, like, if there's bats, or I don't know if we have a DNA marker for bats quite yet. It's not one of our high E. coli, but for this instance, it could be. So more to come on that. But if we just fix that one site, address it in whatever way, whatever appropriate BMP is there, I would say that's worth it. Then that's one reach that's, maybe attaining, and then we go to the next one. Okay, the next question, sorry, sources. So any of those, if you like the form, the visual form, and you guys are collecting similar data, but you want to delete Arizona Water Watch and put Pima, cool, I'll send it to you. If you want to take those apps and, you know, have wet dry mapping, ideally, I would love it if you want to share with other people, because I could collect that data right away to update our flow regimes. But if you wanted to use it for something else, I will give you the coding for that. You can delete Arizona Water Watch and put in whatever you want. So I do that at a national level. Because we don't have enough time. We have to rip off and deploy from each other.
Good.
Did I answer all those questions? I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was just curious then if the others in the group think that you might be able to use these apps even with your own employees, or if you're already kind of set on that in that regard, and you'd be more looking to volunteers to help supplement your data. Does anyone? I'm gonna ask Paula directly. Since you had your hand up next. Anyway.
I mean, I could see where the monitoring that I have to do would be beneficial to Megan's data, because, you know, that's just one more person out there, you know, giving her data. I'm not sure how to use these apps. Well, I guess we could use these apps for our monitoring, our visual monitoring. If we had volunteer groups, I think potentially we could use it for that. But I see it more as, you know, I'm already out there. I can use this app to send data to Megan.
I only suggested that in case it eased your work to have an app in the field. But sharing data is good too. Okay, I'll put my hand down.
Well,
Oh, okay, go ahead.
sorry, Megan. Looking at these graphs, it looks like these increased levels could be due to a rain event. Do you look at that as well? And
Yeah.
do you see any kind of gap in between? Maybe the rain event was on the 25th and you don't see the spike until 2 days later.
Yep, that's a really, really great question. And you are exactly correct that this higher one is maybe like 4 days after a rain event. So I do look at gauge data. I'm looking at spikes, and then volunteers, you know, I encourage them to not sample E. coli after a rain event, because I'm interested in what it looks like at base flow. After a rain event, you're gonna see exceedances for the most part. And so base flow is really what we're interested in. So the Santa Cruz River sites, they try and they'll reschedule a trip if it just rains. And generally we use the terms, you know, after 48 hours of a rain event. So yes. And you can see, you know, general spikes. This is E. coli. It just it's living. It is hard to identify and hard to fix, right? So that's why we have so many impaired water bodies for E. coli. But here you can kind of see the warmer weather. We see spikes, and the cooler weather. I know this is small, but just trust me, this is like the winter months. The water temperature is cooler. Bacteria likes, you know, warm, happy places. And then rain events will be a natural component of this. The samples should be that are reflected here are as close to base flow as we could get.
Thank you.
Isn't E. coli fun though? See, like you know about E. coli.
So that surprised me, because isn't that our impairment officially just for the stormwater sources? So your data is on the base flow?
No, so for E. coli, and here's, what's not exactly fair is you only need 2 impairments to list a water body, and it doesn't matter if it's base flow or storm flow. But when I'm already sampling a reach that I know is impaired for E. coli, I'm interested in, if I sampled storm flows, I know it's going to be there. So I want, the base flow at the different sites to kind of start honing in on why.
That makes sense.
Mhm.
Thanks.
And then Elizabeth and Marie, you guys have your hands up, and I don't know if that's a question or just support.
I, yeah, my comment was that you had those different apps, and I was thinking, I was wondering how that one app might mesh with our system. We have what they call PDOT concerns that people call in or email, and they talk about different issues about whether it's pothole fixing, but it can be flood, erosion, or stormwater quality as well. And so I'm just wondering if those apps would work with our cartograph system or SAM software.
Really, the way that Survey 123 works is it's going to be different for everyone, but it's cloud-based, and then the data is pulled into really an Excel format, in which we have written a Python script to go into our database, because each database is its own nightmare. I think we can all agree. And then once it's approved, that it'll go to EPA. So in terms of, using these pre-built apps, as long as you have, what you guys do, have access to ArcGIS, it can house the database there. You can do your dashboards, and you can just let the data live there. You can extract it as you need it, but if you're trying to put it into another database, you're going to need, coding people involved. By the way, it should be clear, that's not me. I don't know. I don't know that stuff. I just work closely with our GIS team and our database teams to ask for what I need, and then they make the magic happen.
Thanks.
So I wanted to ask you, well, I should say, I know a number of neighborhood associations and really interested people who would really like to participate in citizen science. And so if I wanted, I could add this to my outreach information that's provided to people. So
Yes,
if I
please.
gave them the link to your website, then they could register for taking classes to do the training.
Yeah, so it'd be the website will direct them to me, and then I'll send them, a lovely email like, thank you. I'm so excited that you're excited. And then what are you interested in? Are you interested in a particular water body, or are you interested in, just the trash or the app or wet dry mapping, based off of how much time people have? We are limited by scientific equipment is one, and 2 is time. So the water quality, I always, show like a pyramid. The volunteer groups collecting the water quality, time intensive, right? I'm auditing, I'm writing sample plans, I'm with them, a lot of QA/QC. The other ones, the trash and everything is an easier lift. But also what I love to do is connect people. So, if someone reaches out and they're like, I love Sonoyta Creek, I'll be like, great, we have a group there. Would you be interested in joining them? So there's options, and I would love it if you could share the information.
That sounds wonderful. I think that there's people are eager to do something to be part of the solution. So this seems perfectly suited for that.
Yeah, I love it.
right, well, I think this might be, if nobody else has any questions, I think this might be a good time to pass it over to Elizabeth.
Hi, yeah, I'm going to be going over 2 topics today. City of Tucson is looking at an outreach project for commercial businesses. And then we're also going to be talking about impacts from the unhoused or unsheltered population in the city of Tucson. Next slide. I work as a civil engineer at the city of Tucson in floodplain administration and stormwater management. I'm also the CRS coordinator. That's the National Flood Insurance Program coordinator. And I'm presenting today. Next slide. The first part is we're going to talk about our outreach for commercial businesses, and this is intended to remind commercial businesses about the best management practices that can be used to reduce our pollutant issues. And overall, I think that the commercial businesses do a good job, but I think there's reminders that need to happen. And this photo is a picture of it's our most highly riparian floodplain protected water course. It's what we call an environmental resource zone overlay water course. And this wash used to have a lot of homeless tents in here, and they were washed away during the summer monsoon. Next slide. And there's that same wash nearby, and that's before they were washed away during the flood event. This will be the topic of the second part of my presentation about water quality impacts from the homeless in our water course and storm drain areas. Next slide. The intent of this first part of the presentation is share how the city provides our outreach information. We want to, reduce our incidence of pollutants. This is an unfortunate incident. What you're looking at in this slide, a car wash had a back up on their sanitary line, and it drained off their parcel into the catch basin storm drain system, and then went into our regional water course. And it does look like that's antifreeze, but it's not. It's of course it had pollutants in it. There was the car washing soaps and different things that were drained into this regional water course. Next slide. And Mother Nature came by just within hours and flushed it downstream. Unfortunately, without either commercial business or the environmental hazard group able to get in there to factor it out. The storm event actually occurred outside of the city limits, and the water drained from the upstream portion of the watershed and flushed it out without a rain event. At the location, which was kind of an interesting situation. But anyway, so that's what that photo is. But of course, we know that outreach is an effective tool. And so for the new MS4 permit, we're doing a slightly more comprehensive outreach requirements. So this year we're focusing on actually water conservation is one of our topics, and also low impact design, and then also commercial businesses and how they can take responsibility to help protect our surface water. Next slide. And so as you can see, that's for the fiscal year 2022-23. We want to look at how commercial businesses dispose of contaminated water. So for instance, an environmental hazard company that comes in to do restoration for a building or a parcel, they may vector or suck up some dirty water, and they put it in a tank, and then they go back to their business, and then they're supposed to work with the county and be permitted to put it through an oil sand separator system and discharge it to the sanitary system. But we have seen over the years occasional reports of commercial businesses that do this type of activity actually dumping it out into the right of way. And so we believe that's a serious issue. And so we'd like to focus on that particular type of business, as well as, you know, the car washes and other commercial businesses. Next slide. So the city of Tucson has a stormwater ordinance, and it prohibits pollutants into the storm drain system. And we typically, with our inspection team, they are able to go out, meet with the person doing the discharge, talk to them about the issue, of course, you know, stop the discharge, and, you know, after they've detected the origin, and then also talk to them about the best way to handle these scenarios in the future. If we have a problem such as a big issue like this last that slide with the car wash discharge, we set up a corrective action plan, and that's identified in our code, and it's required. It's in the form of a report. And for instance, in the case of that car wash, the corrective action plan is a report created by an environmental scientist and or somebody that can do these types of reports. It assesses their stormwater BMPs for their site, and it identifies how they can not have this incident occur in the future. Then we require them to take that report once it's approved and be on the site and discuss it with our inspector and their staff at the business site itself to actually go over the report. So it's not just, oh, give me a report, and then the business never reads it. So this way we're requiring them to actually go over it and understand it. Next slide. I don't know, I threw this one in. This is, everybody knows we have our water course system drains from the southeast to the northwest. So the impact to that impaired water in the Santa Cruz is on that downstream side. So the city of Tucson takes care to make sure people have their construction SWIPs and whatnot. We do industrial inspections, and then we have the IDD inspections and FSOs as well. Next slide. We have the SAM software system that our inspectors collect the data, and of course we try to make sure each case is closed out. Unfortunately, the last couple of years, we have seen an increased a number of cases that are moving toward court. For instance, we have gray water violations that we can't seem to get them to understand. They can't discharge gray water off the site per state and local code. So we have one in court right now, and then there's others that are popping up, and I don't know if that has to do with the lack of effort or desire to look at stormwater quality due to COVID, or if there's other issues that are factoring in. The data that we're seeing also indicates that the commercial businesses are one of the audiences that we'd like to focus on. That background snapshot is some of the commercial inspections from the last fiscal year. Next slide. So, we find that, commercial businesses can sometimes have more serious types of pollutants or chemicals that they use. So those potential pollutants make it a higher priority for the city of Tucson. And that's why we're also choosing to look at that. Our IDDE inspections have categories of different types of inspection. The citizen complaint one is generally ones where we can't try to figure out what their issue is. It doesn't fall into one of these issues. Perhaps it's a flood related thing and not stormwater quality. And so, but generally we use quite a few of these other categories. And as you can see, commercial is one of those categories. Next slide. So typically most car washes and commercial businesses are compliant. And so we still want to help remind those that are not, and also remind those that are that maybe they have new staff. It's important that they understand the importance of stormwater quality. And so the outreach project is hoping to increase that education. This particular site, I believe, is Jim Click off of Broadway, if ADQ is listening. That was mean. But that particular group tends to be violating frequently. And so we're going to be moving toward a notice of violation. Next slide. And unfortunately, you can see there's problems with commercial businesses. And so to reduce the number of incidents of commercial company spills or discharges, whether it's accidental or purposeful, we want to make sure that those chemicals or herbicides are reduced from going into our storm drain system. And so again, that's why we're focusing on commercial outreach. Next slide. We want to give the information in the form of a flyer that's going to be mailed out, and part of the message is going to be only rain in the drain, and that make them aware that suspicious discharges and spills, they are reported to the city of Tucson. And so it kind of lets them know, look, we're watching. So next slide. And other key points that we want to share with these commercial businesses include, you know, that we don't want wash water being drained out to the curb line. And as you can see, there's a list of other key points that we're going to be sharing in our outreach message. Next slide. So we're gonna look at updating some older outreach letters. We're gonna use some of our flyers that we have, and we're gonna send out probably a letter and a flyer to each of these businesses. We're anticipating the cost to be a few $100s due to the cost to get flyers printed and mailed. The biggest time effort is going to be spending the time to complete our address and email list for these businesses. We've been talking about maybe doing an email outreach. We're not sure if that's going to be effective or the way to go. That's still up in the air whether or not we're going to do the mailer, or if we have the email, send them the email. Next slide. We're also going to be updating our website. It's an important part of making sure that our information is current and provides a good form of outreach. That's been a little bit of a struggle, you know, with staffing. It's hard to get everything updated. So, but that's an important part of it. Directing the commercial businesses to our website is important as well. Next slide. Then we also want to look at another aspect of encouraging the commercial businesses to look at stormwater quality, and that is to somehow recognize them for doing a good job at protecting surface water quality. In the past, we have acknowledged some businesses in our annual report. The new annual report is not required to have a lot of verbiage. It's a new format. It's a lot of yes and no's and provide us data to ADQ. And then we also have the swamp, and that's more of a procedural document. So we're looking at different ways to look at how we can recognize those businesses that are doing a good job at stormwater quality. Maybe we'll have something on our website, say, you know, business of the month or something. I don't know if anybody's got any ideas. You know, let us know or share. Next slide. I'm gonna try to get through this quick. I see them getting down to the wire here. Part 2 is about the unsheltered impacts on our City of Tucson storm drain system. Next slide.
And Elizabeth, you might
Yeah,
not be
yeah.
as time as you think, because you have 2 spots on the agenda. Melanie might
Okay.
want to tell us how much is left actually.
Yeah, we're on track. You can keep going.
Okay. All right, good. Thank you, Melanie. So in this photo, this is a picture of the unsheltered using a shower. And this is another property owner placing and building a shower on somebody else's property. And then that water is discharging into a flood prone area. It's a map floodplain. And it's also next to the railroad. And the property owner supplying the water that built the shower has a clean out on their property and was telling our inspector that they didn't want the homeless on their property because they didn't want the issues that come along with homeless being on their property. And so there was a lot of issues for this particular incidents. And so we, we had to have the property owner remove that. The E. coli level, of course, was off chart. And the unfortunate problem with this is there was an increase in the homeless deaths. We had 4 homeless deaths and 1 amputation. There's a lot of homeless coming to this location, I think maybe due to this shower, maybe it isn't, but there was an increase in homeless deaths within a few month period in this short location, this area. The next slide. That's the water downstream of that shower. As you can see, there's different types of discoloration and pollutants in there. Next slide. This shower was repeatedly put up, and the Tucson water line that's exposed right there, running horizontally above, was tapped into several times. And so they were tapping into the water line and then setting up the shower underneath the box culvert. And the issues with that obviously are that you're gonna have potential contamination to a potable water system. And then also the problems with the storm water quality in that water course. Next slide. Costs are increasing. We have a lot of culverts that are areas where they collect belongings of the unsheltered, and so we have potential obstruction to flood conveyance. So that can be a serious problem when we do get those larger storm events that can cause overtopping, not just for flooding, but also for the pollutants spreading out over the water, the washes over bank areas. Next slide. What we're finding is that some of the box culverts that get a lot of collection of the homeless, belongings, we have been wondering if there's a link to the type of drug use. I know that with meth, they have what they call a path house in some cases, where for some reason meth users tend to collect a lot of things, or they don't throw out trash, or both. And so you've got a high density of debris. And it's unfortunate because the drug use related unsheltered population concentrate in the washes and the water courses where water quality is so important. We got to have our washes clean because those are the areas where the fastest recharge occurs, those sandy bottom. The regional water courses in particular have the hydrologic soil group A, And then the major water courses, those larger water washes and water courses also have the fast percolating soils. And so the risk of contamination increases in those sandy bottom washes. And unfortunately, that's where the homeless, with the drug use and the collection of debris and contaminants, tend to be in the city. Next slide. Pharmaceutical pollutants, fire damage, increased erosion hazards, also increased safety hazards within our storm drain system. It's hard to go down to washes without seeing, syringes. So it's a safety risk to the inspectors as well. In one case, we have a homeless population that keeps recurring, and they come back and they're terracing some of the embankment areas of some of the water courses, and those areas become a local scour potential increase. So when you increase your local scour because you're changing the flow regime within those channels, you're increasing the erosion hazard. And in one case, we already have a non-compliant building that's right on the edge of the wash, and the 1 to 1.5 slope that used to be straight and highly densely vegetated is now terraced and has the stairs, as you saw in that one other photo earlier, carved out into the side of the embankment. When the large storm events come, that low local scour will occur at those locations and increase the risk for erosion, and thus increasing the risk for that building to fall into the wash. And so the city is looking at how to figure out how to fix the issue. But there was fire that took out the vegetation from the homeless camp fires, and the fire actually caught fire to the neighboring building. Next slide. This is not a photo of that. This is a different location. There's various codes that talk about what's allowed in the washes. Chapter 26 is our floodplain and erosion hazard management code in Article 1, and our stormwater quality code is Article 2 of Chapter 26. Many of these codes talk about not obstructing flow and not causing adverse impact. And so the homeless activity in the washes is illegal based on Tucson code. Next slide. And there's more, that's more sections of our stormwater code. Next slide. We also have protected riparian floodplain. And then we also have code from the 1950s that talk about, you're not allowed to be doing things, collecting garbage and whatnot in the washes. So you have many codes that says, hey, this is not allowed, but it's not like you can send a notice of violation to an unsheltered person if they don't have an address, right? Next code, next slide. And so, the homeless are at risk for drowning as well. We have to always keep that in mind. And so There's also, of course, the related trash, petrochemicals, human waste, flow obstructions, and those things are not allowed. And again, like I said, safety of the unsheltered is also a priority. You don't want them down there because if they're, you know, high or something, they may not be aware of the flash flood condition and drown. Next slide. So this is just a photo of debris moving downstream after a flood event. Next slide. These photos were from some of the folks that were down in the wash during a storm event. And you can see it's not super deep, but it is enough for people to get washed downstream. In fact, there was another homeless person, they were washed downstream and they later were able to get out of downstream location. You can see in the upper left, there's a little ladder that's provided. But in this case, I think the woman on the right, we asked her to take a rope that the inspector had to bring her out, and she was refusing. We think she may have been high because she wasn't very coherent when we eventually got her out, and she just walked away without saying thank you or anything, you know. At one point, I think one of these two were down there, and some of the residents had come out and they said, oh, well, we'll go down there and we'll help them out. And so the inspector was explaining, no, you don't want to go down there. You're going to add to the hazard. You're going to also be washed away. So what happens is, you know, this is before the 911 responders could come. So, you know, during this few minutes, you know, we're increasing the risk to the residents nearby because they're trying to help, but then they become at risk as well. So, next slide. Human access controls are something that we're looking at. The problem with that is that it actually is a safety hazard to install these. This design was supposed to be angled a lot more, but regardless, even more angled gate like this can still pose a hazard if a hand or foot gets caught, and then they can't move and the water's continuing to rise. So unfortunately, deaths do occur with these types of controls. And so we're trying to find different alternatives to human access controls in this box culverts. People can be washed downstream in these washes and then get pinned against the gate and then drown, regardless of being pinned as in having their foot or something caught, but actually the force of the water holding them against these structures. This is, again, this is the upstream side of an entrance to a box culvert. And so as a civil engineer, I do not recommend the use of these because of the risk of recreational user or the unsheltered or someone actually getting pinned against it during a high flow event. Next slide. Is there more? Let's go to the next slide. Is that it? Next slide. Let me see if I missed something else here. This just says contact the city, but I also have another document I was gonna share, but I can just talk to you about that. The city of Tucson has a retrofit project proposed, and that's part of our stormwater new MS4 permit. And we're choosing, we're looking at 3 locations to do a retrofit project. One of them includes homeless impacts to the storm drain system and what we can do to improve that E. coli condition. And those, we've been starting some sampling in the Santa Cruz. And then we also have a second project, and that is a joint effort with ADOT. And ADOT is working with us to look at improved communication when there's a discharge between ADOT right away and the city of Tucson MS4. And so that's our second project, retrofit project. And then the third project is looking at student housing. So the student housing area on the downstream side of the university has some high-rise buildings, and those high rises have various stormwater issues. For instance, we're finding that some of the students bring their dogs up to the top floor and they do their business on the roof instead of walking across the street to an allocated area where our understanding is the yard is picked up periodically. So when the dog is defecating on the roof, it directly goes into a storm drain. It comes down into the street. And then we also have other issues such as trash collection and the way their procedures for trash collection. There's various issues with that. And then also discharges from chlorinated jacuzzis and pool, and some other stormwater quality issues. And the retrofit we anticipate for this is looking at developing new code requirements for these types of new development buildings so that the development provides more accommodation to address stormwater quality. And there's been some preliminary discussion on how those regulations can be drawn up and instigated. And so that's what I wanted to share with you today. And does anybody have any questions?
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. As that presentation covered both the pollution sources and the BMP's discussion. If anybody has any questions or comments that they'd like to make related to either of those topics, go ahead. We have about 13 more minutes.
I'll jump in at some while people are thinking about their questions. I guess my video is frozen. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I hear you, Mead.
Okay, great. That we can post or even just share by email as well. Any of the outreach you've developed, because you mentioned some pool discharge outreach and gray water. And I had questions first about those two. The pool discharge, it seems like that's a real opportunity for water conservation as well.
Hey, Mead, I think maybe you're dropping out partially because I think I'm only hearing part of your sentence.
To do that with. Oh, is it choppy?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
sometimes you'll just disappear. I don't know. Did everybody get that? Tell me
Yes.
again about the pool.
I'm sorry. I can't seem to be able to turn my video off. It might be affecting it. That the pool water could be an opportunity for using the water.
So to answer that, I think what you're saying is there an opportunity to use on-site pool water for on-site uses? So unfortunately, with student housing construction, in some cases, 0 setbacks or very small setbacks are provided. So providing an area of gray water discharge and gray water compliance isn't available to retrofit on these particular parcels, but yes, for future development, maybe. I have a feeling that'll have some pushback because if the student housing construction is required to reduce their footprint, then they have less rental availability for the number of units that they're going to get. So what we can do with the pool water is make sure that the plumbing plans show clear understanding of where the roof drainage is, where the pool and jacuzzi drainage pipeline, plumbing is, and also where the sanitary lines are, and making sure there's no cross connection, or that it's clear on the plan so we don't have issues like that, as well as making sure that the jacuzzis are clearly identified and where that plumbing goes, because I think we've had some issues with that some of them were not connected correctly. But as far as gray water use, that's trickier on the student housing because they tend to appeal and they intend to want to have a variance and go with 0 setbacks. So that's part of our challenge. I see Marie's hand is up. Or me, did you want to do follow-up?
Yeah, just as a follow-up, I wanted to know, were you including the definition of gray water, the pools, as well as some of those? Are you seeing that gray water issue that you mentioned with commercial areas as well?
Oh, for our commercial outreach, yeah, so for pool companies, part of our issue in the past has been the pool companies are telling homeowners that, oh yeah, you can just discharge it, and so that's one part of the education that we want to make sure that all of them are understanding that we don't discharge chlorinated water offsite, and then that we want to make sure that the chlorine is dissipated before discharging it either to a sanitary system or to another system, storm drain system. But also the pool companies are doing construction activities where they create a slurry after let's say they grind down an existing pool to do a resurface job. And that slurry, I should have showed photos of that one. That was a good one. Where they discharge the slurry, out the back, a wall, and then it drains down into the street and down into our gutter and into to the storm drain system, and that kind of material is not good for the storm drain. It mixes in with the debris and it causes serious clogging issues that we have to factor out. So I think part of the outreach will include something to the effect, look, if you do impact our storm drain system, the city will be asking that the business pay for Vector service or that they get the Vector service to clean it out. So is that answering your question, me?
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Marie.
Hi there. Thanks so much for your presentation gosh, you guys have some serious trash issues.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did want to ask you a question about your commercial sites. One of the things that we found is that there are some commercial sites that are absolutely spotless, both in the parking lot as well as the fronts of the businesses and behind the businesses. And then there are others that are just in terrible condition. And I was wondering, in your experience with your commercial sites that you do inspections at, is there a characteristic of what makes one commercial property cleaner than another?
You know, I haven't seen any particular characteristic that would say, oh, this type of business or the size of business or that type of business owner does a better job because of XYZ. I just haven't seen that yet. It's just, you know, various occurrences. You know, in one case, there was a big business. They were somehow, I don't know if they were producing beer or, you know, something to do with beer. And they looked like they had a really good business there, and overall everything we saw was good. And yet there was all this beer running off through the valley gutter and down into the street. And so we had to talk to them about it. So in some cases, there's accidental discharges from a business that intends to do the right thing. And in other cases, in some of those photos that I had, you could see that the business did not have secondary containment, let alone other BMPs or good housekeeping measures in place. So it's just a wide variety. I don't know, Marie, have you seen any correlation with anything?
I have not, and it's possible that it's just a matter, it's on a case-by-case basis of who the manager is and what knowledge they have about keeping stormwater clean.
Yeah, and so that's why we're hoping our outreach will help. I think I might pass this along over to you as a draft to see if you have some input on our letter before we send it out.
Sure.
And also maybe to Mead, so she's got some input too. And of course, to Megan. So Mead, Megan, and Marie.
Happy to help.
All right, cool. Any more questions?
I do have one, and I since Megan's still here, she might be able to help as well. When we're looking, connecting the issues like what she presented about source tracking of the E. coli, if homelessness is a potential cause, is there a way to parse out whether a septic could be contributing, since we know it's not the wastewater facility? Is there a way to know whether, I guess you might know if it's stormwater runoff, then it's not septic. But has anyone ever already worked through those kind of issues?
That it's hard. But that's where that kind of unique sampling, the sewage sniffing dogs have come in handy. Because they'll bow down. So if you walk the reach, they'll tell you where the septics are leaking.
Oh,
Versus the E. coli that just says there's poop in the water, or the ship and sniff, which you could collect that sample, and then they can at least tell you there's human sewage present in the sample. So I think the best answer to that is it's expensive though, you know, thousands of dollars, but that's the only thing that I would know of for, you know, septic specific leaking detection.
that's interesting.
Yeah, in our floodplain ordinance, we require septic to be offset from flood zones. So, you know, there must be older septic tank issues maybe that are showing up. But one thing to note, Pima County, the wastewater department in Pima County will look at aspects of how flood prone areas, erosion hazard areas impact the infrastructure for sanitary lines. Whereas the floodplain ordinances look at how those sanitary systems, septic or otherwise, are impacting the floodplain, and how we look at a different side of it, what happens if it breaches and that kind of thing. So that's something to keep in mind. The other point I wanted to make, and I think Mead, you were talking about gray water. I'd be happy to go over our gray water ordinance in a future meeting and talk more about that, because it's kind of an interesting code and it poses other interesting challenges.
I think that'd be a great future topic. Because yeah, it'd be good to hear more.
Yeah, it's kind of got a lot of little bits and pieces to it. So I don't want to get too much into that in this meeting.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much for your presentation, Elizabeth, and also to Megan and to Marie for your presentations today. And of course, if anybody has any other ideas for future agendas, feel free to send me an email and we can try and get it onto the agenda for the next time. So because it's 4:01, I'm going to turn it over to Paula and we can get on to this last agenda item.
All right, on your mark, get set, go. No, everyone have a good afternoon, what's left of it, and we will see you next time. Meeting is adjourned.